Hello and excuse me, and welcome to my presentation for Task 1. This is asking me to explain what the roles and responsibilities are of a teacher. So there are 4 main questions with a couple of other questions if I want to throw those in if you've got time. The cat's just left the room. First of all, what are the roles and responsibilities of a teacher in education and training? Well, teachers get drawn into absolutely anything, but according to Anne Gravels, there are 5 key points about being a teacher. And the 5 things that she covers are, first of all, identifying the needs of your learners. Even if you're only spending an hour with them, you need to find out roughly what it is that they want and what they need from you. Secondly, it's obviously putting a plan together. That doesn't need to be a substantial plan, it can be, but it needs to be an idea of what you're going to cover and what the goals of the learning are going to be so that you can express those to the learners. Thirdly, to facilitate the session in a way which is inclusive, which tries to bring everybody in, not leave anybody out, and which stimulates learning for everybody. And then the 4th one is to assess the learners. It's often forgotten by teachers that their responsibility is to check whether or not the learners actually got what it is they're supposed to be getting, and then finally to actually evaluate the session itself. And that's not just the learners evaluating, that's also self-assessing for the teachers as well about how things went so that you can make improvements. Around the details to all of those, if I apply that to my own particular teaching, the first thing we do around identifying need, particularly on this course, is I speak to everybody and we send an enrolment form. So on that we ask whether anybody has any special learning support needs. I also have a conversation with everybody and I find out what they already know, what they're hoping to get out of the course and what their particular specialism is. So I'll probably spend about 15 minutes on the phone to everybody. Now not everybody can do that, but I think within any organisation, if you're starting off a session, you've never met anybody, you can at least do an activity which says, what do you want to get out of this session, who are you, tell us a little bit about what you want. And that needs to be adapted to your needs. As far as planning is concerned, we always do lesson plans. So every single lesson that we have has a lesson plan, but we have to plan in other ways. So we have to contact the accrediting body. I've already registered everybody on this course with AIM so that they get a certificate, because you can't start a course without being registered. I have given you all passwords for our Moodle site. I've also liaised with the front of house so they know who you are, booked the room, etc. On the facilitating stuff is concerned, hopefully by now you would already have seen how I facilitate. Whether it's successful or not, I do try at least to bring everybody in. I try to bring a little bit of jollity into the room. I try to make sure that I'm not speaking for too long and that there are things for people to actually do, and I like to give people options as far as possible so that everybody is included within the session. The 4th one is assessment. Now this is quite an easy one to talk about with regards to this course, because I obviously give you assignments. Now they are written assignments, but they don't have to be written assignments. I do give everybody the options to complete that in whatever way they want. But I'm assessing all the time. I'm watching and I'm observing, I'm seeing who's struggling, I'm seeing who looks confused, and I'm checking over to see whether or not people are challenged enough, whether people are finishing stuff too quickly, and I'll have conversations by the side with people to see whether or not what it is that they're doing or we're doing is right for them. So I'm assessing every single learner. And the final one is evaluations. We do a lot of this. We ask the learners to evaluate their own sessions. We ask them to evaluate months after the finish of the course as well, to see whether or not after a long period of time it was any good for them. We also ask all of our trainers at VAL to fill in a little form which tells us whenever they do training whether or not they felt it went well or whether the resources need changing, and if they do then we do. So we evaluate. So I think that we at least from a theory point of view cover all of those responsibilities. So that brings us to the second question. The second question is on need. Why do we identify need in the first place? Well, there are lots of different reasons why we do that. As we know, we all come from different vantage points when we arrive, and we all want different things. We'll all be motivated by different things within the classroom. And so finding out about that will mean that we can plan a lesson much more effectively. Everybody will have different aptitudes, so they will come, for example, with lots of experience of teaching. There are some teachers on this course with massive levels of teaching experience, and I would expect them to do slightly different things, and I'll ask them slightly harder questions or different questions from some learners who haven't got any experience. And of course there's the obvious one about barriers to learning. So we need to make sure, particularly from a legal point of view, that we've identified if people have access needs, or they have hearing impairments, or they have learning disabilities, or any support needs like dyslexia or dyspraxia. We do that, and throughout this teaching course, although not on this one specifically, we've had learners who've been blind, who've had hearing impairments, who've had mobility issues, etc., anxiety issues. And with all of those, and this takes us to the third question, what kind of things can you do in order to adapt your lessons or in order to respect equality and diversity in the classroom? For a start, you can adapt your teaching such that people are able to benefit from it. And I'm sure you'll all be aware of things that you can do with resources like changing colour, etc. There's specifically a lot of learners come now and they have issues around autism, so that might be anything on the spectrum like Asperger's. So there are various different strategies that you can use which will hopefully suit learners with those particular issues. So I'm not overloading learners with too much information, making sure that you build in opportunities to reinforce learning so that you praise them for things that they are doing, that explanations are quite clear and that are slow, and then you check understanding. It might also mean that learners find it difficult to plan themselves, so you can sit with learners and check that they've understood what it is they're required to do, or you can help them to put a plan together. But anyway, the bottom line is with any learner, if they have any issues around support, the best thing to do is to talk to them and ask them what has worked successfully for them. So there are lots of other examples I could give you around support that we've provided for learners. I have actually done this course online for a learner who was completely deaf. And what we did was we did this online and we communicated with each other through a little kind of MSN messenger box beside the tutorials, and we typed bits and pieces out. And we had some of the materials done in. We gave the learners resources beforehand, so they had a heads up on each of those before we started the session. So the leading that we had was much better. But within a classroom, anything you can do, things that you can do to appeal to equality and diversity is making sure that you treat people with respect, that you're a role model, that you give people as much as possible similar levels of time, that you don't indulge the minority at the expense of the majority, that is having a laugh with 2 or 3 people because you like them but you're not too keen on the others. Being careful of what you say, because sometimes your assumptions can be that people are like you, etc, etc. So there are lots of different examples that we can give. And the last one, which is number 4, which is about legislation. We are required to respect a whole range of different pieces of legislation, and I'm sure you'll be familiar with these. Most importantly, health and safety. I always, at the beginning of a session, give out instructions on where the fire escapes are, on where the first aiders would be, what to do in the event of an emergency, etc. If ever people are moving around the room, I always ask people to move their bags or to check underneath them so that they don't trip over. And we have risk assessments for each of the sessions which give a rough idea of what we're going to do in the event that things go wrong. We also ask people about their health issues, so that if they do have health issues, then we can help them to help themselves. It isn't just about legislation, though. There are lots of other kind of codes of guidance and conduct. I mean, as teachers, we are governed by a code of conduct for teachers, which is produced by the Society for Education and Training. And really, it goes through Gravel's 5 key steps to being a teacher, but it also lays down ethical boundaries for teachers about things that they should do and they shouldn't do. So it lays out stuff like communications with students, relationships with students, fraternising with students, giving lifts to students, etc. And if you have a professional body, then they probably will have standards as well. I know if you're a social worker or a care worker, then they will have professional standards for those, which you'll be required to abide by whilst you're teaching as well. And as an organisation, we have codes of conduct about things that we should do and we shouldn't do. Working alone, for example, with learners, one-on-one. Shouldn't really do. I mean, I do it, but according to the rules, I shouldn't do it. But we also have codes of conduct which are laid down around things like assessment. So if I assess work, then it has to be second assessed by somebody else. I have to make sure that I get copies. I keep copies of all the assignments so that they can be assessed by somebody else in the event of a complaint or a query. So as well as legislation, there are rules of codes of conduct which are laid down by the professional body for teachers, and there are also codes of conduct laid down by my own organisation. So I think that is my answer to the first 4 questions. There are 2 other bits which I'm asked to reflect on, and I'm not going to cover these, but you can. And that is, firstly, what other people might you have to arrange with or liaise with? What other professionals might you have to coordinate your course with before you even start teaching on it, and that's going to include people like front of house staff or anybody that's doing your reprographics or the accrediting body, or it might be if learners are being referred to you, you might have to speak to the social workers, you might have to make your manager aware of it, you might have to get budgets agreed if you're spending stuff, etc, etc. This will be dependent upon you, but all you'll need to do is to talk about the kind of relationships that you might have or you do have with other people when you are planning your course. And the second thing is that you're going to also not be able to assist some learners with some things which they will be concerned about. So these will be dependent upon the learners that you have, but they might, for example, come to you with mental health issues, or they say that they're poorly and they'll want your support for it. Now, you're not expected to be an expert on all of these, but you are expected to know what to say or to have systems in place such that you can refer them on. Now, that won't always be that you've got a telephone number handy, but it is about drawing together some ideas and some suggestions that you can make to your learners. For example, if there were financial difficulties or if they had housing problems. We are talking about teaching adults here as well. Or if they had substance misuse, drug dependency, alcohol dependency, whether there are any organisations in Leicester that you might be able to refer them on to. Study skills is another thing. Your learners might say, look, I'd love learning your stuff. You sent me a piece of work and you've asked me to do some writing, but my English is really poor. Where can I go to get help on this? And you might say, well, why don't you go to Leicester College or the Adult Learning Service? So in your answer, you're just expected to explain the kind of places that you might refer people onto. And here comes the cat, which I think is a sign that I must have finished this. So I've been going for about 11 minutes. If you answer those 2 additional questions, you'll probably have all that you need to be able to get credits for the first 6 criteria on this course. Don't forget, you don't have to do this presentation thing. If you want to, you can just prepare a piece of writing which answers those questions. I think this gets it out of the way quite quickly, and you can do it in pairs with your partner, and they're going to mark you, and obviously I'm going to second mark as well, so that by the end of the day you should have completed this and you don't have any work to take home with you. Anyway, I hope that was all right, and it gives you a clear indication of what you should be doing. Good luck with preparing and planning yours. Please plan yours before you actually do it, rather than do it off the top of your head like I have. Not a very good role model, but good luck. Thank you very much.